Good morning. My name is Debbie Tulang D. Silva, and I'll be your MC for the day, and I feel very honored to do so. I'll go a little bit more into my own introduction and share with you why I'm excited to be here a little later. Right now, we are very honored to have a very distinguished and well-known individual with us this morning to help us open such a great conference. And help us come together as one, put our minds together, and be able to share together very important information. So at this time, if I could get your attention, I would like to call Kumuhinale Moana Wang Kalu to come up and share with us the address that she will have this morning in welcoming us to this conference.
Ano ai ke aloha ia kākou a Paulo ai ke ia kakahiaka. Aloha. Mahalo anui no ko kākou hui ani ke ia la mai kai. Mahalo nui a ukou. No ko oko kipa ana mai kahi au a kahi au ke ia pai aina aloha nei. A o ka leo aloha, me ka leo mahalo anui ho ike ia ukou. Mahalo no ke ia launa ana. A no ke ia la mai kai o ia ahahala vai nei. Ladies and gentlemen who have come this morning, I'm just going to take a moment out to have this be a teaching moment so that when you walk away from today and you remember one of the first things that you heard this morning, you'll understand a little bit more about it. So that way you have just a little bit more understanding as to some of the cultural etiquette that our Kanaka of these islands observe when we begin. So in the Oli, what we acknowledge as Oli, or our chant, that is the traditional way our people would greet people, and there are many forms or many different styles of chanting. In my Oli this morning, I will invoke the presence of our kupuna and those who have gone before us and ask that their presence be with us, that they fortify what we do for each and every one of us who represent the language and the culture that we do. We know that this language has been handed to us from our grandfathers and grandmothers and all those who went before. So please, won't you join me in unifying our thoughts, our minds, and our spirit, and unifying our efforts today. May all of your engage and your discussions and all of the sharing, may it be productive, strengthening, and empowering for everyone. Oh, ino igalani ino gea gua mano gea gua iluna gea gua ilalo gea gua yuga gea gua ikai. Mai na gugulu o ka hiki a hiki hawa inui a ke a hawa inui kua huli hawa ikai kino kala api I mai I hae hae. O mala ela kalania ike a ke a o he a o ka mala malama. Ho mai kalamo ka ike ka maupopo ke a ka mai. O mai ka ika hele ana, ka noho ana, ka hana ana. O maluhia ke ola ana, ka imi ana, ka nawe ana I ke ola pono. I pono mauna kule ana pau. Mai na vele launa kua lono na kua hivi na kua mauna. Mai kaulana kala I lehua hoi papahana o moku a kea. He kai a kea nalunui a kea moana nui a kea. Wa ike a ho ike ala nui o ka iini ka nuu e kulia mauai. O halia ku nei leo I the magani nui I the magani igi. Makani hea o magua nagi a I o bo me ge ao. No u kana au ao, kana au haa kana au pono. Kana au mae kana au aloha ke aloho na kupuna. No luna pau mai ka mana nui e. E aloha gu, e aloha mai, e aloha nui hoi e. ola ho ina mea pau. Lele mauli ola, lele wale aku e. A mama, hua noa. And in the words of the Oli, once again, the ancestors, like guardian angels, to be with us and to share in time and space and to avail the ancestral knowledge that allows us to do what we do. Aloha. Oh. And before I leave you, to honor from one side of the island chain to the other and wherever all of you may come from.
Mo gu ka pawa ka weheno ke ao he ao ula wena ia lei mala ma lei kua lono lei kua hiwi o hau mei kalai. Mai kahi kina mai hae mai kumukahi I lono nui a kea. Mai ka laila ka mai a ka nove ula kala I ke alo o mauna lo wahae. No mauna kea no hualalai. No ko hala I ke ehu kakai a ka no la e. E o ka ma ehu kupana ha ka naloa. No loko lilo ka moana lipo lipo. Ho o ipo ka hahano o ke kukuna la. I halea ka la kahi o ke kauloho kapua o hina e. E o e makua hine hina o ka mākou. E o e kaula hea o lana I hale. E o e moa ula nui lau o moa ula iki. Hea kua na laina gugulu o ka hiki e. Hiki na ea kula I ka ihi kapu aino ahu nui alua. Ku hano hano mai o mauna ka ala e. He a ala ka laua e. A ala ka moki hana. A ala ka maile kalu hea o uka o ka mawailua lani. Nani lua ole ka hele nei kalalau. A iala ka wai mapuna ola o wai ale ale. No na naluna ale kai hoi e hea nei e hoi ka waa. Hoi aku I ka malu ihi o pani au. He lau ele ka mana o upua e ke aloha. Ka haali ali ai ka moena pawe he o ka ua e. No ka hele lani ea ka huli lani. E o mai e ka lani o ke aua malama lama e. O malama. O pūlama, ho āhia kalama kukui he manoa ka mai. E ia ka mahalo ka haina no ia lei. Ka puana o ke aloha e. Ke aloha la, he aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Aloha.
Thank you, Kumuhina. What a beautiful way to open up our language access conference this year and to get us in the right mindset. We thank Kumuhina for calling on the ancestors to be present with us here today and to bless us with having fruitful engagement with each other for the rest of the day. Kumuhina's distinguished bio is in your packet, in your folders. If you don't already know, Kumu, she is a well-known Native Hawaiian teacher, cultural practitioner, and community leader with a long history in perpetuating Kanaka Maoli in our islands. So we thank her once again for being with us. Once again, if you weren't here from the very beginning, my name is Debbie Tulang D. Silva. I will be your MC for the day. I am the project director for this Hawaii State Judiciary's Office on Equality and Access to the Courts. I'm excited to be here with you today, as I am every year attending this language conference, because I, as well as you, and I know I don't have to preach to the choir, we are all interested, are very sensitive and aware to our limited English proficient customers and clients that we serve in whatever area of work that we do. In the wake of such disasters and challenges that we face, not only in our own state, but also across the nation, it is so fitting that the conference this year is focused on the theme of language access in emergency disasters. In working in this area of language access, we all know that the level of an individual's limited English proficiency is significantly impacted when faced with circumstances of crisis or emergency. When I do trainings to individuals that do not work in this area, I spend a lot of time emphasizing that even those who speak English have difficulty communicating effectively when they are placed in a situation of crisis or emergency. Then you think about a person who has limited English ability and place them in that same situation of crisis or emergency. And I think only then can we appreciate how difficult it is to assist people in those critical times. And so I welcome all of you, our honored guests and our attendees today, in coming together with this common thread of wanting to assist individuals and to open ourselves to how we can better do that with the resources that we have amongst us, as well as the willingness to share with each other so that we can better serve our limited English proficient communities. So before we get into the wealth of knowledge that we do want to share with each other, I do have some housekeeping information that I do want to make sure that I cover with all of you. So first and foremost, all of you at registration should have received your folders. And so I do want to go through that really quickly to let you know the important information in there. So in your program booklet, you should have a PowerPoint to follow along with our keynote speaker that will be taking the stage in a few moments. You will also have two larger cards in there, and we're calling those connection cards. And I want to go through the purpose of those cards with you. So mainly it'll serve two purposes. So those connection cards you can fill out, and if you need more, we do have those available as well. Please see the registration desk. And we want to use those cards as a way to get information to each other. So one purpose will be to complete it with your name and your organization's contact information there. And you will be able to share any announcement, events coming up, or any type of resource that you feel people may not know about, no matter what jurisdiction or island you're from. And so you can use that to post that information, and you will be able to have it posted on the bulletin boards here. And then throughout the day, all of us will be able to venture there and review that information to see what we could use to help us better serve our LEP communities. The second purpose of the connection card is to connect with a specific panelist, speaker, or some entity or person that you meet with today that you already, as you were speaking to them or listening to them, think that we often do this when we network, I need to get into contact with that person. But I didn't have a chance to run up to them and get their business card or get their contact information. So the connection card allows you to, again, put your information on there with a specific request to that individual or organization. So what we're asking you to do is in the first line where it says suggestion, before you list or detail what it is you need from that entity, go ahead and identify the individual or the entity. And then place both cards in the basket that is going to be available at the registration desk. Staff throughout the day will look through the cards and decide which is more appropriately should be posted on the boards and which is actually for a specific entity, organization, or individual, and they will get those cards to those recipients, and so that those recipients can then get in touch with you. These are all efforts to help us network better, because we do know that from evaluations in the past and many conferences that we go to, that networking is so valuable, and it's more of what people want. They wish they had more time for networking. So these are efforts to help us do that, in lieu of if you're not able to actually get to speak with someone during the conference. Okay, those are the connection cards. You will also see in your folder index cards, and these will be used for our question and answer sessions that will follow our panel presentations. So if you do have a question pertaining to what you're listening to in the panel discussion and you would like it to be addressed, please write your question on the index card and raise it up, and we will have 2 runners monitoring the floor during our discussions. And if they want to identify themselves now, if they're here. No? Not here yet. Okay. So what will happen is when they see you lift your card, they will collect them, and we will hopefully be able to address the questions at the end of the panelist presentations. Although you're all familiar that we may not be able to get to all of those questions, but the questions will still go to the panelists if we don't get to them. Okay, bathrooms. Bathrooms, let's see, make sure that I got everything in the folder. No, evaluation is another thing that is in your folder. Please make sure that throughout the conference you take some time to complete those. Evaluations are very important for sponsors to continue, for 2 purposes: to continue being able to offer the conference or the event, and then 2, to always constantly improve, to make sure that they're meeting the needs of their attendees. So we ask that you complete those as well and fill them out and submit them at the end of the day. Okay, bathrooms are located not on this floor, unfortunately, but there are bathrooms upstairs and downstairs, and there is an elevator outside of this exit here. There is a men's and women's bathrooms on the floor above and the floor below on the Mauka and Makai sides of the building. So there are 2 areas that you can use the restrooms. Okay, we will have breaks. The program agenda is also in your program booklet. We will try to stick to that as best we can. Refreshments will continue to be available during the breaks. They will continue to be outside on the Plaza Lanai level to the left of the building, or the Makai side of the building. We are also going to be having exhibition tables. So there will be a few exhibition tables with resources for all of us to review and engage in, and those will be on the right side of the building or the Mauka side of the building outside on the Plaza Lanai level as well. Lunch will be downstairs, and we'll go ahead and address that as the time gets closer on another break. But lunch will be downstairs in our sitting area. Okay. So I think that is it for housekeeping. One important thing, though, I do want to add to the housekeeping list is parking. I want to make sure that everyone is in the correct parking area so that your car, you do not get a ticket or towed, as the university is pretty vigilant about their parking. So for this conference, the designated area is parking lot B, which is the grass area to the Mauka side of this building. So if you are in one of the stalls, or even the disability stalls, I believe that you need to move your car into parking lot B. So you're going to want to make sure that you're in the right space. Without further ado, I do want to thank and recognize our sponsors for this conference. The State of Hawaii Office of Language Access, we thank you. Can we give them a hand for putting on this free conference every year? Thank you. I want to introduce the Director of the Office of Language Access, Afarak Barumgruin, or more known to most of us as AP. AP has just been a great resource since he has joined OLA. A personal friend of mine as well, as we work closely together on grappling the issues that challenge our limited English proficient community here in the islands. AP is the executive director for the State of Hawaii's Office of Language Access Office. And prior to his appointment to OLA, which we more well known his office as OLA, in 2017, he was the project coordinator with the State Department of Human Services Literacy or Limited English Proficient Program. Excuse me for that, the project. And that project as well, similar to mine, develops and implements programs and services that better help to service the limited English proficient customers that they serve, and providing meaningful access to the programs that our state government provides. AP is born and raised in Bangkok, Thailand. He did receive his law degree from Thammasat University in Bangkok, and did immigrate to the United States in Hawaii in 2001, where he received his master's in law and Juris Doctor degree, as well as his certificate in Pacific Asian Legal Studies here at our own University of Hawaii's William S. Richardson School of Law. So we are very fortunate to have AP working hard for all of us in helping us to come together as agencies and providers in servicing our LEP communities. So without further ado, I welcome AP to the stage.
Thank you, Debbie, for very nice introduction about me. Okay, first of all, aloha and welcome everyone. Okay, like Debbie said, my name is Afirak Bamrungren. You can just call me AP, it's easier. When I see a lot of people, what is your name? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm afraid to pronounce it. You know, like we are immigrants, sometimes we don't want to offend someone, and we don't want to presume, or we don't want to assume. So, yes, here we go. My name is AP, easier for everyone. Okay. So first of all, on behalf of the Office of Language Access and my advisory council member, we welcome all of you to the 2018 Hawaii Conference on Language Access. I would like to begin by recognizing our advisory council member, as well as the Office of Equality and Access to the Court, and OLA staff for their hard work in organizing this event. I would also like to thank Kumuhina, who just left because she have another important event to go, but she just spent her time for us because we want to start with Oli with respect to our culture. So all the conference to keep a good spirit, good start. That's why we want to make sure that it's culturally appropriate by starting with Oli. And I also like to thank Danny Wong Tomiyasu, the Deputy Director of Health Resort Administration for the Department of Health, for taking her time out of her busy schedule to be here with us today to give us a welcome address and spend her time with us in this morning. And most importantly, I would like to extend my mahalo to all the speakers and our keynote speaker that joining us today. We look forward to hearing and learning a lot of good things from each of you. And also, as I look around this room, I see the many diverse faces in this room. It's representing what is Hawaii. We are the most diverse culture. I'm sorry, I'm so excited to be here. It's my first conference. Okay, Hawaii is one of the most culturally diverse states in the nation. We have more than 200 dialects speaking in the state of Hawaii. And most importantly, 1 in 8 of our population, roughly about 160,000, speak English less than very well, or we call them limited English proficient individual. That's including me. Like Debbie say, I'm not from here, I'm from Thailand, so English is not my first language. I started learning English when I moved here when I was 24, so now I still call myself LEP. People say, oh, you're a lawyer. Why you call yourself LEP? I understand you, but please keep in mind, communication is go two way. You might understand me, but I might not fully understand you. So don't presume or don't assume that assumption. Just keep in mind when you work with the LEP population. Okay. Okay. Like I say, English proficiency or the lack of proficiency has strong impact on people's life. It could impact their economy, social activities, health, and wellness, and access to education, employment, benefits program, or activities. And now we hear it also have impact on access to important information like emergency situation, how they address the emergency situation when they have limited English proficiency. Because language can be a barrier and it's also an important factor to the ineffectiveness of communication when we try to do emergency information dissemination to the LEP population. That's why we here, and as you can see this year, they have too many events that happen in our state. We talk about flooding in Kauai. We talk about eruption in Big Island. We talk about now during the hurricane season. So it is a good time for we here to address the issue about emergency. We want to make sure that our LEP population have access to services and information to help them prepare and to respond in the case of emergency. So that's why this year the theme is communication, communicating in disaster. Okay. So as you know, the objective of this conference, why we here? Because first we want to look at the need for and the requirement of language access in the disaster. So we also here to address the issue about language access in the emergency situation and management. And also here, we are the well of resort here. Everyone here from different agency. We have interpreter, translator, we have government agency, nonprofit organization, private organization, healthcare provider, police department, we have a fire department, everyone here together to make sure that we can pull the resort. We will work together how we ensure the meaningful access to our LEP population. And for today, the guiding us in this journal that we're gonna walk together from here until the end of the day. I hope everyone can stay with us all day long. So gonna be our keynote speaker, and we also have 3 panels. First panel is gonna be about citizenship, about LEP population, share their experience, how when they went through all the emergency situation, because their perception might be what we're thinking about emergency. So we want to hear from our community what they think about emergency. And for the afternoon, we will have 2 panels, government agency as well as the private agency. Now they want to share the resort, how they address the issue about the language access, and to make sure everyone aware and know what the draft program is about. So, okay, it's my hope that this year's conference will be an important step toward information sharing. Like I say, we have connecting card here in your folder. If you would like to connect with anyone you think is a good resource, please feel free to fill up that one, and then we will make sure it goes to the right person. And like I say, and also I believe that I hope that this forum will be the forum that we can develop the idea and action step to ensure the meaningful access to our LEP population. Once again, welcome and mahalo for everyone for coming to this conference this year. Thank you. Okay, now next step, I would like to introduce Danny Wong Tomiyasu, who is the Deputy Director for the Department of Health. So she will be here to give us a welcome address, but a little bit about Danny. Sorry, I call her Danny. I know Danny since I joined the Department of Health in May 2017. She is the Deputy Director who oversees the Family Health Service Division. This is Outbreak Control Division, Communicable Disease, and Public Health Nurse Division, Chronic Disease Prevention and Health Promotion Division, and most importantly, Emergency Medical Division is part of her administration. I know Danny when we went to I spent some time with Danny when we went to the 2018 session. We have a chance to interact and talking, and she's really passionate about the language access issue. And I'm grateful that she's here today and give us a welcome address for our conference Welcome, Danny.
Aloha. I wanted to, on behalf of the director, Dr. Bruce Anderson, and the entire approximately 3,000 employees of the Department of Health, to welcome you today and to thank you for being here. And it's wonderful to see everybody in the audience, and there's a lot of people I do know and a lot of people I don't know. And it's great that this opportunity is here for you to all network and get to know each other better, because I can guarantee you, in an emergency situation, you're going to need each other, because nobody can do it alone. This is really critical that you are all here today to be able to network. The theme for this year's conference is very timely, as Debbie had mentioned earlier. We are on the heels of two natural disasters, the Kauai flooding, and we are still very much involved in the Kilauea East Rift Zone. So you can see it on the news every single night. There's updates on what's happening. The Department of Health continues to monitor the air quality of that area and informing residents and visitors alike. We also are attending to the mental health issues, things that people had never really thought about when looking at an emergency. And so when you're looking at these very complex issues, as well as communicating them to the community, it's important that the LEP community be very much involved and communication very open with these communities. It's a sober reminder for all of us that we all must be prepared. So it's important to plan ahead. So the key message here is plan ahead. And today's the best day to start if you haven't started already. I know AP had some data, but according to the US Census Bureau, the American Community Survey of 2013, 25%, or about 327,000 Hawaii residents 5 years and older speak a language other than English at home. These individuals are often the least informed about emergency and disaster preparedness, so it's vital to ensure that everyone is prepared. When limited English proficient individuals are not able to access emergency or disaster information, the consequences could be deadly. However, communicating effectively can be challenging, not only to language differences, but also cultural differences and differences in social norms. So communicating effectively goes beyond ensuring that your information is translated into the many different languages that you need to. You must know who, how, and when to best deliver those messages. And the best time to deliver those messages is before an emergency, not during an emergency. So if you haven't already planned, start now. Now is the time to know who your English proficient populations are. Understand the differences in language and in culture. Now is the time to outreach to other government, private, and community partners and develop critical relationships so when disaster strikes, you already know who to contact and what to do. So those connect cards that Debbie talked about are really important for you to connect with those people today. This conference will serve as a forum for information exchange and for communities and agencies to collaborate and develop ideas and better ways to serve our LEP communities. The Office of Language Access is here as a resource for you. Please do not hesitate to reach out to AP and his staff if you need any assistance. In closing, today is all about planning ahead and developing your partners and to start now. In conclusion, I just wish that, I apologize that I'm not going to be able to stay for the entire day, but I hope that you will have an engaging and productive day and conference, and look forward to working with all of you in the planning for your LEP communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. Well, with all that warm greetings and bids of motivation and inspiration, how can we not have a productive and engaging day? And so without further ado, I would like to start the information sharing of this conference by introducing our very distinguished keynote speaker. Suzanne Frew is the president and founder of the Frew Group, which is a certified woman-owned small business that helps public and private sectors and communities more effectively build risk resilience and respond to and recover from disasters. She and her associates work with clients to create culturally competent policies and programs, trainings and communication strategies that are relevant to the unique needs of each community. What I find impressive about Suzanne as well is that she knows our state, she knows our unique communities. As her impressive bio states, which is in your program booklet, Suzanne has lived full-time in upcountry Maui for several years and worked with various state of Hawaii agencies in helping us build risk resilience and culturally competent programs and services. Suzanne has worked extensively with the state of Hawaii and the Asia Pacific communities on a wide variety of disaster risk reduction and resilient initiatives. In addition to that, and prior to that, she did work with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, more familiar to us as FEMA. So with that federal background as well in working with FEMA in mitigation, public-private partnership, development, and public information and development since 1990, she has a wealth of information and experience to share with us. And as I understand her presentation and address to us today will focus on culture. And for many of us that work in this area of language access, we know that linguistic and cultural challenges are the approach that we need to go forward in mind. That culture goes hand in hand with language and that you can't effectively serve our LEP communities without both of them. And so we welcome Suzanne to the podium to give us her address and share her knowledge on culture with us.
Aloha and good morning, everyone. Okay. It is my honor to be here, and I am so excited about this chance to have this conversation today about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and being here, I know it's near and dear to your heart as well. Now, I want to do something a little unusual. I would like everyone to turn to someone next to them and tell them good morning, and you can do it in your mother tongue, however you would like to, but I would like you to take just a second and turn around and say good morning. I love hearing that laughter. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So I just want to say thank you, AP, the council, everyone, Danny, Carrie, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Debbie, thank you for that introduction. So thank you so much. So why am I here? Well, it's very, very simple, really. If there's a risk out there, everyone needs to be aware, yeah? Everyone needs to be aware of this. And sometimes that doesn't always happen, for a lot of different reasons. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of those issues and explore some of the challenges, and then talk about some tools that we can use to really help get those messages out. So over the next few minutes, we're going to explore those ideas, have that conversation, and I invite you to continue that conversation today when we have our wonderful panels, when we're having our breaks, and also when we're eating. So I would invite you to think about these ideas and talk about some of the things that you have experienced as well. So why is this so important? Why is this fact that we need to be able to make sure that everyone should be informed? Well, the bottom line is really, it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility professionally. It's our responsibility as a person who belongs in a community, as part of an ohana, as people who live here in the state. So if we really take a look at it, our bottom line is we need to be able to reach out to everybody, because there's so many different individuals that live in our communities. And it's our job to make sure that they understand what those risks are. And sometimes that takes a little extra effort. But the bottom line, again, is our job is to serve everyone who is there. So why is this challenging? We have so many shifting cultural and social landscapes. We have issues that are becoming more and more complex every single year. Don't you feel like that? I mean, I do when I look around. I think it becomes more complex with social media, with all of these different things. We have issues of globalization. The world is getting smaller. Yet, again, people are traveling more, people are visiting other countries more, people are coming to Hawaii more. We have so many changes that are happening, and the world is becoming very, very globalized. And that impacts the health, that impacts people's understanding. And that impacts the ability of people to take more risks and go travel from places that we're not as familiar with, but they will come to our community. So we have demographic and cultural shifts. We have a lot of things that are happening in our community. The population is aging. People are migrating. People are reaching out to each other in ways that are very, very different. We have a lot of global risks that are taking place. And the global risks are things like our changing climate. We know this. I don't think any place like Hawaii experiences it like in Hawaii, whether you've got issues regarding the coral reefs, the population, the fish, all of the areas in the Asia Pacific are seeing real impacts. And now we're seeing issues with very extreme climate events. We're seeing flooding. We're seeing fires. I now live in Northern California. I've worked with Hawaii for basically since 1991. And now I'm living in Northern California. And as we speak, there are people fleeing their homes from fires. And they're telling us this is now the new norm. And this is very frightening. Last year in my community, right north of my community, 5,000 homes burned down. And again, is this the new norm? These are things that we need to take into account as we look at what we're doing with our communities. So we look at expanding technologies. I don't know, anybody here have teenage kids? Anybody? I have a daughter who's 17. Who's like this. No, not this, yeah? So on social media, all of those things, those expanding technologies. But it also provides a lot of power to us as well. We're now seeing things like 3D printing. We're seeing all kinds of access. There's access for healthcare in Africa because of these mobile technologies that they've never had before. I've been told, I don't know if it's true, that more people have cell phones than they have toilets. I don't know if that's true, but I've got friends who work in the communities who say that. Really powerful to show the power of this mobile technology. Unfortunately, we have a rise in terrorism. We've got things such as cyber terrorism, and we also have the in real life terrorism. We have changes of the rise of individuals. We have changes of the players who are being active. We can see it and we don't see it. But we also know that we have to account for it. And as individuals working with health and getting access for everyone to have that information, it's critical that we know how to reach out to people. So we're always in a constant state of change. It's always that way. So if we look at language, wow, there's some statistics that read from the ethnology language of the world that there's 7.2 billion people on Earth. And with 7.2 billion people on Earth, there is an amazing statistic that there's quite a few languages that are out there. And the languages that are out there are in all different, look at this spread. It's really quite extraordinary. If you take a look at the way it breaks down, it is, sorry, I'm just getting, I think somebody grabbed my little PowerPoint from here, but that's okay. There's 7,100 languages known in the world today. That's extraordinary. Actually, there's 7,102 languages. 23 of the languages are a mother tongue for more than 50 million people, and they make up the native tongue of 4.1 billion people. I mean, this is extraordinary. And a lot of these people are traveling. A lot of these people are migrating, and they're coming to Hawaii. So what does that mean? That means that our communities are changing. The face of our communities are changing. The challenge for Hawaii is that we don't have one landmass. We're spread out. We've got areas that are really challenging to reach. We've got areas that are very congested, downtown Honolulu. Then we've got areas like Molokai where you have to go out to get to them. So we've got some challenges within this state that are quite extraordinary. So we talked about some of the statistics earlier. I love the statistics that were given, and I'm not going to repeat those. But it's really quite extraordinary how many different languages are spoken in the home. And I have some information, one piece of information that's a tad bit different too, which is in the home, it ranks 6th in the US for the percentage of foreign-born population, and number 9 in the nation for the percentage of people speaking another language at home. That's really extraordinary. So we have such a challenge in front of us for just language alone. Not just culture, but just language alone. So what do those challenges mean? Well, we've got a few, but the good news is we've also got some great tools. So the big thing that I'm going to talk about today is the cultural context. So that cultural context is, what's the psychology? What's the condition of all of those individuals that make up our communities? Now for Hawaii, are those all people who live here? No. There are people who are tourists. There are people who are transiting. There are people who are coming in and out of the airport. There are people who come in from all these different cultures. The issue is not just the language they speak, but it's their culture, and most importantly, it's how they make their decisions. It's their decision-making process. And for us, we need to put the facts into context. So I love this saying, we don't see things the way they are. We see things the way we are. We don't see things the way they are. We see things the way we are. This is a cartoon that I think speaks very eloquently to what we're addressing. So you have a woman who's in a bikini and a woman who's in a burqa. The woman in the bikini is saying, with a bit of judgment, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. The woman in the burqa is saying, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male-dominated culture. This cartoon by Malcolm Evans that came out a few years ago in 2011, I think really summarizes the challenges that we face, is that we see things the way we believe them. And as we go out and think about communicating, especially in dealing with disasters and risks and health risks, these are very, very important. So I want to start to talk about this from a personal standpoint, because my big key here is we start with ourselves. So I would like to start with myself and where this really changed for me in my life. So I had been working in disaster and community resilience for quite a few years. And a few years back, in 2002, I went to Russia, and this was my child that I met for the very, very first time in 2002. This was a baby house in Pskov in Russia. And this was the moment they put her on my lap, and she was warbling because she was so nervous, because I didn't look the same, I didn't smell the same, I wasn't wearing the same clothes, and that was her. We brought her home, and for the first week, the big challenge was that she would take her sippy cup and shove it into our neighbor's dog's mouth. And the dog loved it. Oh, yay, yay. Then she would take the sippy cup and shove it into the cat's mouth. No, no, no. The cat was trying to claw her eyes out. Cats and dogs. And I kept saying, no, 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 honey. No, no, dogs and cats are so different. No, 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 no. It took about a week before I realized she had never seen an animal. So when we think about how we speak with people and how we communicate with people, we need to think about the context. Well, I want to show you, this is her the next year, still loving dogs, still loving cats. This was her the next year. And this was her a few years ago on Maui with her crew. We're both outrigger paddlers, competitive outrigger paddlers. And this was her with her crew. And she now definitely knows an animal. She knows what a cat and dog is, and she's quite amazing. So that was my lesson, to bring it home, to really bring it home to me in my house, even though I had been working with this for years. So I'd like to go on and talk about a few stories. Let's talk story about success and failure. So I want to start with what I consider to be the real catalyst that changed this for us. The book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, is an amazing and tragic story of how culture ended in tragedy. A little girl who was among refugee, who came in, an immigrant who came in from Laos, came to California with her family to Merced, California. And at the age of 4, she had her first epileptic seizure. And the family had their understanding of what epilepsy meant. And the medical community, who absolutely was trying to do their very best and care for her, had their belief in how to treat. And it continued on where they were both cultures. One culture, the medical community, didn't understand the spiritual connection and the spiritual belief system of this family. Well, unfortunately, the little girl had a grand mal, and she went into a coma, and she stayed that way until she died at 30 years old, having been in a vegetative state basically her entire life. It was because of the culture that resulted in this tragedy. And I'm happy to say now that this has changed. We hear the term cultural competency. cultural humility. There's a lot of models out there, but this is one of the amazing stories, the background stories. This book, if you have not read it, I really encourage you to read it. It's won several awards, but it was the change. It was really the change agent to say, how do we really need to address culture when we're working with individuals and families? So I had my own experiences. First, I will tell you some of the failure points. So when the Northridge earthquake happened in 1994, I was in charge of quite a few teams from different languages who went out into the communities, and there was 8 different cultures that we were working with, and my job was, I was tasked to help them understand how do we take steps to prevent things in the future, to mitigate against future risks. And we began to realize about the culture there. Every different culture in Koreatown and Chinatown, all these different cultures had their very different way that we needed to reach out to them, even though we had language specialists at the time. I also was tasked to put out a brochure with information, and it needed to also be in Spanish, and it had to go out to 300,000 people. And at the time, I knew that it needed to be someone who understood the Spanish, that the dialects and things locally. But I ended up going with somebody who was on staff who spoke Spanish. The result was some of the technical information that went out, and all of those 300,000 brochures was wrong. It was wrong because it was the wrong dialect. And I learned my lesson early on. I knew it, and I didn't stick to my guns. And I had to own that mistake. Later, I was working with the Navajo and down in Arizona. And when I went in, we were working with preparedness issues because there was health issues about the clothing, there was health issues about the fires within their homes. And they said to me when I was working with the council, they said, oh, you cannot talk about death and dying because our elders absolutely will not accept that. So we needed to think out of the box and think, how do we deal with this? How do we figure out preparedness information? So we went into symbols, and we went into the wheat. We went into, I'm seeing some head nods, yeah? So we went into the wheat, we went into the sacred mountains. These were what represented longevity and life. That is what we needed to do there. So when we think about how we work with our cultures, we need to think about what works with them. Another example of something that's happened more recently has been some issues surrounding a measles campaign. The Somali population that was in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they had been given information, the false information, the old information about vaccinations create problems, right? Health problems. So there was a lot of information about that was circling around for quite a while. And those issues were, they didn't want their children to be vaccinated because they were afraid they were going to have autism. So because that was what was out there, that was the information that was being presented around. So when the King County Health Department was realizing their vaccination rates were very low, they got support. They said, we can't reach the Somali population because everybody in Minneapolis was telling them in their local community, no, because you're going to have autism. And so they went out and they found cultural interpreters. They found a firm that could specialize in working with the Somali community. They went out on Facebook Lives. They went out on local community access. They found who the trusted messengers were. They found the ways to translate that information, to make it information that the local people would believe. But they knew they couldn't do it alone, and they went in and they found an organization who could help them, who could make that transfer for them. And it was a very successful campaign. But again, they learned from what happened in Minneapolis, where it wasn't so successful, until they could figure this out. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to move knowledge, because we all have lots of knowledge in our jobs. We learn a lot. but we're trying to get people to act. We're trying to take that knowledge and move it into action. So how do we do that? There's a secret sauce. I like sauces. There's a secret sauce to this. So it's called social science. It's psychology. We need to find out what it is that drives those individuals to make those decisions. We want to move them into action, right? We want them to take precaution, to take preparedness if they need to evacuate. We need them to evacuate, and we need them to do it in a way that we can reach them. But we need to take knowledge and to be able to move that. We need to do a lot of things to turn that cultural background into information that's powerful for us to use. So we have toolkits. So what I'm going to do is introduce some tools to you that I invite you to think about in each of your jobs when you go back to your organizations, to your agencies, to your hospitals, to take some of these thoughts back. And let's look at how we can use these in our work. So I'm going to invite you to consider this. This is steps. There's a lot of different frameworks that are out there, but these are steps that we want to take. First off, they have to hear you. They have to hear your organization, your agency. We have to physically get this in front of them. Yeah? We have to know the networks. We have to know how to dive in there. We've got to know how to get that access. That's the first step. They have to believe you. They need to believe our message. So is it going to be from maybe a government worker? Maybe not. Maybe it can be from a local minister. Maybe it can be from the captain of the football team. Maybe it could, whoever it is, it's a trusted messenger, and they need to be able to believe. That's the key. They need to take it. You need to get that access out there. They need to believe it. The next step is they need to personalize it. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? It's got to be personal. If it doesn't speak to me, I'm not going to listen. I got too many things to do. Then there's something called milling, and my colleague Dennis Milletti has really driven this. He's a social scientist, and he has really put this out there, and it really resonates. If they believe it's going to make a difference for me and my family, we're going to start talking about it. What do you think about it? Do you think it makes a difference? Let's hear it. They're going to go out. They're going to check it out. Check it out. Does this make a difference for us? Should we act on this? This is the milling step. And that is what we need to do to get them to act. We need to take them through this process. And if we miss a step in here, there might be a really good chance that they don't get to act, that we don't get the actions that we're looking for. So there's some concepts and there's some frameworks. There's quite a few that are available, and I would just like to introduce a few to you. So the first one is what I call the 3 pillars of cross-cultural communications. So the first one, where does it start? Remember what I talked about? With me. That's right, I'm seeing some fingers go back. It starts with me. What do I need to know about me? So when you go out there, don't start with them, start with me. How do they see me? What am I? Who am I? How am I being presented? How am I being perceived? That's the first step, the self-awareness. The second step is about them. What do I need to know about them? What do I need to know about their culture? And we'll talk more about that. And then only then can we actually look at how do we communicate between the two in a way that's going to be successful. The next one is what is termed the iceberg of culture, and I really, really invite you to take a look at this. This has been one of the most important models for me to use over the years, and it especially started for me when I was working with some terrorism programs early on, where we were looking at issues that were very, very deep. Now, let's look at that. Up high, we'll see the things that most people just take a look at. We'll see the art, the dance, the sports, the music, all of those things that sort of people paint. That's all above the waterline. When you get a little bit lower that, you start seeing time, space, Time and space, yes. So trust me, upcountry Maui does not work at the same time as downtown Honolulu. I can guarantee that. So, but other issues that come into it, especially in health, the concepts of cleanliness, the body language, the social distancing, then you get deeper. Religious beliefs, behaviors, tradition, social relationships, child rearing, taboos, like we talked about with the Navajo, group orientation, hugely important. Then when you get to the very bottom, that is where huge amount of shifts need to take place. Who's got the power? Somebody who might be the translator might not be the person who calls the power shots for the family, yeah? Ideas of justice, good and evil, individual worth. That is something that this iceberg I have referred to endlessly over the years. And I invite you to go back and look at it too as you're looking at your outreach to individuals. High to low cultural context, very important. So if you see on the left-hand side here, this is high context. Personal, localized interaction, very, very important for these cultures. Then when you start going down, you start seeing it start shifting. It goes down and goes up the other side, all the way to the right-hand side, where it's the low context. And that means instead of that personalized, localized group relationship interaction, then you've got abstract ideas. Maybe it might be through knowledge, maybe it might be through research, something like that. But this makes a big difference when we're thinking about those communities that we are trying to serve. Thinking about where they sit on this spectrum from the high to low context culture can really inform how we do our outreach, how we create our policies, how we do our campaigns. Think about those communities that you serve. And think about who they're connected to. So we talked about earlier, one of them I think you talked about the journalist rules. Journalist rules are all very, very good. Journalist rules, who are they? What do they need to hear? What are they going to be able to hear? When do I need to hear them? When do we need to tell them? Where are they going to hear us? Are they going to hear us at school? Are they going to hear us when we're, at church or at a temple? Or where are they going to hear the message the most? And how do they need to hear it? Maybe they need to hear it online. Maybe they need to hear it digitally. Maybe it needs to be a flyer. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it needs to be through radio or television. But this set of journalist rules can be very helpful as we create our campaigns and go out. But the culture drives the answers to each of these individual items on this list. So cultural profiles. This is where we start really building for our individual communities. We have demographics. We know demographics. We know how many people speak different languages in their house. We know where Hawaii sits on immigration, all of these different items. But we need to go beyond those baseline demographics. We need to get into the cultural details of those communities, and I invite you to think about creating and crafting and writing, what does a profile look like for those cultures that we're trying to reach, for our individual communities. So when we do that, how we do that, is we start looking at the communities that sit within each community. Now you might have one big community, but there might be lots and lots of sub-communities within each of those. So when we start thinking about that, is it by geographical boundaries? If you're only on Big Island and you're only on one side, is that a boundary that really makes a difference for them? If you're on the North Shore or the South Shore of Maui, there's really different perspectives there. If you have immigration status, Is there issues pertaining to that community that have to do with immigration status? Does it have to do with their demographics, their age, all of those different things? We need to think about all of those when we start creating those profiles. And those are the pieces in that identifying the communities within the community that is so incredibly important. So we create these, we need to ask questions. We need to ask questions of ourselves, of our colleagues. We need to get out and we need to talk to those trusted sources, to those individuals. Somebody who's a kapuna might have a totally different idea than somebody who is 12 years old and sitting in middle school. But we need to start asking questions and not be afraid. Take some risks and go out there and ask those questions. So when we're building those cultural profiles, here's some suggested elements that you could include in, especially when you start looking at the way disaster fits into all of this. And especially if you're trying to drive them to becoming resilient. Disaster experience, it's amazing. So I'd like to ask a question. Have any of you in here ever been in a natural disaster? Raise your hand. Okay. So a few of you have been in a natural disaster, all right? So those are issues. Some people don't have it in their generation. They don't have it in their mind. And that can be really challenging if they don't know because they've never experienced it. It's just they hear it from their fathers, they hear it from their grandparents. But again, those are really, really important. About 4 years ago, I was out working on a project that I'll talk about a little bit later, but we were out in Hana and we were looking at the shoreline, and we got out of our car and I was with the planning department and we were walking around, and some folks came out, of course, to see what we were doing because we stopped our car and got out and we were walking around, and we were talking about tsunamis. And we were talking about that, and we asked the girl who came out and said, do you know about the tsunamis? And she said, oh yeah. And then she started talking about her family history. And it goes way back. And that stayed in their family story for a very long time. But there's a lot of people who've moved in who don't have that family story. We certainly, are experiencing that right now in Big Island with what's going on there. So again, thinking about what their disaster experience is. Who's at risk? What's the at-risk population? Are they living in an area where disease could spread very quickly? Are they in an area that is in an inundation zone for a tsunami? Are they in an area that's going to get flooded? Are they also in an area that might not be able to handle the kinds of drought that some areas are starting to experience, and they're making shifts in economies? These are things that are really important when we start building that. Their ethnic identity, their religion, their group identification. These are really important issues that we think about, especially because there's so many visitors that come to the state. The community networks, you all are very good at that. We've talked about how do we get out there? How do we engage them? Figuring out where their networks are. Technology. How many people are on social media? Those kinds of pieces are really important. The media exposure, the formality. Are they going to want it very, very proper from a government agency, or are they going to want it from somebody that they really respect? Those are things that we need to think about as we're developing these profiles. And migration patterns. Are they coming in from Micronesia? Are they here? Are they coming in from Japan? Are they coming in from the mainland? Where are they coming in from? And what is the culture and their expectations that they're bringing with them? And then globalization. How fast can that information get out? When we've had some disasters back in '94, when we had the disaster in Los Angeles, we had lots of folks from America and Samoa who were they had strong family ties connected there back in their own hometowns. So again, Those are the things that we need to think about when we're building those cultural profiles. So cultural relevance in messaging. We need to figure out when we create those messages. So we have the background, we have the context, we start developing the profiles. Now let's look at the messages. What are these messages that need to go out? How does culture fit into that? So if we think about the different ways that we can speak to individuals, we think about the way that we do our outreach. It might be extremely different between the different cultures on the different islands. It could be different ways of reaching out based on those cultural profiles. So those are the kinds of things in the actual messaging itself that's super critical. So I've been doing a lot of work with the Department of Health in the state of New Mexico, and we worked with them a lot on Ebola. And so the issues surrounding Ebola were very important there. And it was really challenging because if there was transport even across a reservation, there was issues surrounding the disease and cultural traditions surrounding that access, or allowing people access in, or not allowing people access in. So when we think about the messages that go out, and the messages that go out in conjunction with our first responders, how do we create those messages that's going to be the most relevant for that community? Now, it can be really different if it is a no-notice event. If there's something that happens very quickly, if you've got an earthquake that takes place, that's a no-notice event. You have to know very, very clearly what it is that you need to say. And it's got to go out fast, and it's got to go out immediately, and you need to have that instant credibility. So doing that work ahead of time to know who that messenger is, what your fellow organization that you need to drive that message out. It might not be your organization. It might be another organization. It might be the Red Cross. It might be the school system. But the relevance in that messaging makes all the difference in the world when you start looking at the journalist rules. Again, think about the who, what, why, when, where, and how. All of that impacts the way we create the culture in that message. So I'm going to invite you to look at these two terms. We all know, because of where we all know what translation is. Translation is literally taking that information and translating word for word. We also know that it's extremely important, especially for directions. It's important for particular kinds of information and data to have those literal translations. But perhaps it might not be the most important thing when you're actually trying to communicate a message that you want them to take action, where you want them to move, where you want them to take information that you're generally presenting and move it out and get them to take action. So there's a term that I want to invite you to consider, and it's called transcreation. So transcreation is where you take that information and you don't change the meaning. You keep the meaning the same meaning, but you might not use the same words. It might not literally translate from one to the next. Okay? So if you think about that, then you need to think about where that culture is, how they're going to respond to the culture. So transcreation is taking the emotions. It's taking the language. It's taking the culture. It's putting it all together, and it's making this connection with all of these different elements that's not just the literal translation of the language, but it's putting it in a language, an emotional language that they will understand. The words might be quite different. There's it turns out that it's not quite so as true as they make it out to be, but there was a car. Anybody remember the car? It was called a Nova. Yeah, you remember the Nova? Came out a long, long time ago. So they created this Nova car, and then they were selling it in the Spanish-speaking countries. So does anybody know, separate the Nova? No go. Now, how does that sell a car? So that is the example that's being used a lot for you can't just do translation. You've got to figure out culturally what it means for these folks. Okay? Now, it turns out I've also read different accounts on the Nova, and apparently it did sell fairly well down there, but there are a lot of examples. There were some other examples with health departments on the mainland where they were taking translated words and it didn't work. It didn't work because when it translated over to another language, it was not the meaning that they wanted. So I invite you to think about what you're trying to get out and think about, again, it's yourself, it's who you're trying to reach out to, and the best way to communicate between them. Maybe there's a transcreation piece that you need to do. Maybe there's some heritage. Maybe there's some culture. Maybe there's some ancestry. Maybe there's some issues surrounding the immigration. Maybe there's all kinds of things. Those are the pieces that we need to put in here. So there is the language piece that's critical. There is the piece that has to do with emotion, because you want the emotion to stay the same. You want to drive them to do the action. But you can't do it unless you also put in that cultural piece. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge that we face. And again, it impacts not just the messaging. When you're looking at everything to do with resilience, whether it's health resilience, whether it has to do with anything to do with making decisions on land use, where people are going to live, where people are going to leave, when people are going to evacuate. This is the secret sauce. This is a lot more work than just taking the language and changing over the language to their language. It's a lot more responsibility for us, but it's really, really critical that we move them to that. So innovative outreach and engagement. So if we think about it, we think about how can we take these messages out. Sometimes it might not just be a flyer. Sometimes it might be something completely different. So I've done a lot of work with countries in Southeast Asia, and it's very, very interesting how they have found other ways to get the message out. There are some communities that live on boats, and they go in and out of the areas depending on the seasons and the flooding. And they found ways to do disaster preparedness messaging through backpacks and through songs, through children. Their trusted messenger was not the adults, it was through the children. And they actually created backpacks, and they created the songs, and they got them to create these messages because they knew that little brochures were not going to work. And they knew electronics were not going to be the answer. So when I first came to working in disaster, I got pulled in 1990 when Super Typhoon Owen had just gone through Chuuk and Yap, the Federated States of Micronesia. And we needed to get messages out. We needed to get information out. And they were so dispersed. And so we were trying to figure out ways to reach them. So we decided, okay, we're going to do it through the children again. And we're going to do it through fishing boats. When the children were coming back and forth to school, we were trying to find innovative ways to do outreach. So if you think about your communities and you think about the islands that you serve, and you think about the ways that they resonate with language, then that's where you start getting into the secret sauce. How are we going to do it? It might be completely innovative. It might be through hula. It could be through any kinds of things. Think about the ways you could reach these people, the folks who are at risk. Again, and it's everybody. But you think about those different innovative techniques. So here's an example. One of the ways that I'm really finding now that I am loving is through gaming. Has anybody ever done any kind of gaming in doing your healthcare outreach? Just out of curiosity, anybody? Some of you? Okay, good, great. So gaming is a really interesting way to start getting people to think about the kind of message that you're trying to get across. It's also a great way to work on those pillars of cross-cultural communication, to find out about the other people. So this is an example here that I'm going to show you here of where we were working. This was with federal funding. It was with NOAA. It was with the Sea Grant program. And it was basically coming in, and we were trying to find a way after there's going to be, it's not if, unfortunately, but it's going to be when there's going to be major storm events that's going to impact. We were looking at issues in the county of Maui. And we were looking at issues surrounding, there's beach erosion going on, there's all kinds of issues going on, but the planning department is trying to prepare for rebuilding after an event. We watched what happened with Hurricane Sandy in New York. We watched what happened with these horrible events that took place over the last couple years with the fires on the mainland and all the flooding. And the challenge here was that we had to get the permitting going very quickly. But how to do that? So we did it through games. We thought, okay, we're going to get out and engage because people are very protective of land rights, particularly in Hawaii. They're very cautious of when people come in and tell you what to do with your land, and how you're to build on your land, and when you're to build on your land. So we decided to do gaming. So what we did was in a program called Safer, Stronger, Smarter, and we were looking at ways to rebuild. We went out to different communities. We identified a local person who was the trusted messenger, and we brought them on and paid them, and they were our outreach arm. Okay, they were our outreach arm. They did the coordination. They identified the stakeholders. They went out and they helped us identify all the different stakeholders, the different participating organizations. We looked at real estate. We looked at land trusts. We looked at environmentalists. We looked at store owners, the merchants. We looked at the tourist industry. We made sure we brought in Kapuna. We made sure we had student leaders at the local high schools, all sitting at the table. Everyone was there to play the game together. That was the engagement. The non-governmental organizations, the community organizations, those folks who were, that's who everybody went to talk to. The aunties that were there that everybody came home to and talked to. We wanted them at the table. We got them to the table. We went out to 5 different communities. We created a game board. And on that game board, we had different land structures, different kinds of beaches, different kinds of cliffs. We had all these different land. And then we had issues, we had different kind of housing. Because as we know here, we've got all kinds of outbuildings, we've got all kinds of things. We looked at all these different components. And then we created a board, and then we got them together, and we broke them out into teams, and then we had them play the game. So now, why was this important? Because it wasn't the government coming in and telling them what to do. It was us being there to listen. It was us being there to bring them together and give them a platform to discuss. And they then created, you can see on the game where they were putting red dots, they were putting yellow dots and green dots. And then a result of that, we pulled it together. We created these workshops, and we did it on Molokai, we did it in Hana, we did it on the North Shore of Maui, we did it in all the different locations. And they were radically different. Some places wanted outbuildings built immediately. Other places, like Kihei, they wanted swimming pools. Why? It was economy. They wanted tourists back. Now, it was not going to be the same for Hana. It was not going to be the same for some of these other areas. So those are the things that we pulled together. And then from that, we developed policies, an outline, and then we crafted messages that could then be put out if there was an event. So that was the information that we gathered. And again, it was us listening to what they wanted. Okay, so that's an example of gaming. I was just working in Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands, and we were working on some other issues down there. And I was working with a local government agency there, and one of the big issues there was being able to get all the voices heard and being able to save face. That was the number one issue, was saving face and letting everybody's voice be heard. So we did it through games. So we did a day-long training. I love developing training and bringing these innovative ways in. We created a game for each individual module, and we did it through different ways and different tactics. Each game was quite different, and it allowed people to shine. It allowed people who oftentimes have no voice to have as much voice as some of the individuals who were there with power, people who were related to other people, people who had come in from other countries. So again, that was an example where we used individual games in a training session. It wasn't just going out to the community. That was for their own government agencies. So again, that was a way of, you think about the way that you can do this. There's lots and lots of different ways, and I invite you to brainstorm and think about what some of those ways could be. And I'm certainly available to work with organizations to do this as well. Please feel free to ask me. And today, I'm here all day long, and I absolutely invite any kind of discussion. So what does this get us? It gets us culturally relevant preparedness, and that's what we want. We want to be able to get it out to everybody who is at risk. We want to be able to reach all those different members, okay? We need them to perceive that they have risks, because some people don't. Some people depend on other people. But we need them to be able to perceive it. We need them to be able to understand it. We need to be able to support their risk reduction. That can be tricky sometimes, because sometimes there's decisions that are really difficult decisions that impact the entire family, that impact the entire community, or the entire congregation. It can be really difficult when we look at the lava flow going on. We look at what's happening with the neighborhoods. We have to see ways that we can engage people and give them empowering information for them to be able to make the decisions. So we need to be able to have reduced health impacts, near and dear to everybody's heart. And importantly, when there is an issue, when there is an outbreak, when there is something that's happening, when there is going to be a tsunami, do we want them to take their surfboards and go to the beach? No. Does that happen? Yes. We know this happens. We have video of them. Oh, let's go down. Let's go watch the wave, you know. But there's also issues where it can absolutely be deadly. After the 2014 tsunami in Southeast Asia, I worked in Sri Lanka. And I was in Sri Lanka where 30,000 people died. And in one of the towns where I worked, an entire school was right next to the beach, and everybody died. So these are issues regarding how we get this information out. Some of the issues of why some people died in that tsunami is because of women's clothing. Who's been taught to swim? Who's not been taught to swim? Who doesn't want to leave their community? They know they're in an at-risk zone, but everybody in my family has lived there forever, and I don't want to leave. This happens over and over and over again. This is where we find out, we use those tools, and we find out how to get in there and how to build increased community resilience. That is what we ultimately want, right? That's what we want for everybody. So I do a morning meditation. This is a little personal, and this is good. So I do a morning meditation, and this is a book that I have used that talks about greatness and how we have greatness. And the greatness talks about how this particular book has to do with spiritual greatness. But I would invite you to consider this information that I'm presenting to you, I think is a really great way that you can show the leadership in your own organization. And not just at work. I'm talking about at home. I'm talking about in your community. I'm talking about with everybody that you come in contact with. Because we need leaders. We need leaders who really respect that culture and how we work with different cultures. It's not just in our jobs, even though I know that's why we're here, but we take it home. So we think about it. First, train. Get people to know how to do cultural inclusion. Get people to understand there are tools out there. Share those tools. I'm happy to help you learn how to do that. Figure out the way you can be the catalyst of change in a very, very positive way so we don't have that tragedy. Develop the skill set. Learn about yourselves. Help your colleagues learn about themselves before they go out start working with other people. Learn those core skills of how we use the journalist rules when we start creating that, when we create those messages, when we create those policies, when we create those protocols. Even those protocols of how we respond, if it's like a health crisis, or even how we respond for our organization. Provide learning opportunities. Think of ways that you can get out there and help your colleagues really learn how this makes a difference. Help them identify and develop their strengths. Figure out everybody's got a different set of strengths. Let's get it to the table. Provide resources. There's lots of resources out there. I'm happy to share them with you. And I know that everybody at all would be happy to share them as well. Take risks. I'm going to repeat that 3 times. Take risks, take risks, take risks. We can only learn by getting out there. Give new assignments. Figure out ways that people might be able to speak better. They might be a better trusted messenger. And after an event happens, get that information from them, debrief with them, find out what you can do better, and then share that experience. These are the things that make a big difference. I'm going to close on a beautiful quote that comes out of a book from one of my favorite authors, Annie Lamott. And she wrote this when she was in response to the Mount Vision fire that happened many years ago. She wrote it in this book called Stitches. It says, "It is most comfortable to be invisible, to observe life from a distance, at one with our own intoxicating, superior thoughts. But comfort and isolation are not where the surprises are. They are not where hope is. Hope tends to appear when we see that all sorts of disparate personalities come together, no matter how different and jarring they may seem at first. In life, the fussy beautician can be beautiful beside the motorcyclist with neck tattoos. Only together do we somehow keep coming through unsurvivable loss, the stress of never knowing how things will shake down, to the biggest miracle of all, that against all odds, we come through the end of the world again and again, changed but intact, more or less." Mahalo. So we have some time for questions. If anybody wants to ask anything, please don't. And if I know the answer, I'll give it. If I don't know the answer, I will figure out who might be there to answer. We've got microphones. I think the microphones are going around.
Good morning. Thank you. That
Good
was very
morning.
informative. The book that you mentioned in the very beginning about the Hmong family, the Hmong. I'm curious what information could have prevented that young girl from living in a coma state. What do you think was the relevant information that would have changed the family's mind?
I think it's really important, and that it's not just the family's mind, it was also the medical provider's mind. So for the family, in their traditional spiritual belief system, when she was having her seizures, they believed it was spirit speaking. And so they were not as familiar with her epileptic seizures. And they didn't have any support system in the medical community to understand what that spiritual interpreter was. So now they actually have Hmong translators and Hmong spiritual leaders who go into some of the hospital systems, because they need them to understand. That's the cultural competency. That's the cultural humility, is listening to the other folks. I mean, this was, it was a complete tragedy. So, and again, it is having that interpretation. And it's the cultural interpretation, not just the language interpretation. Great question. Thank you. And if you haven't read the book, has anybody in here read the book? Yeah? Yeah, pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Sad, very, very sad, but it has really changed the face of the way we look at these cultural differences. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
So I have the mic. I wanted to ask about the term transcreation, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant concept that we can all learn from. Where does it come from, and where can we read more about it, please?
Sure. Google it. That's the easiest way. Google, our best friend, huh? Don't do Google Translates, though. No, just kidding. Don't do Google Translates. Transcreation actually comes out of kind of the commercial world, when they were looking at marketing. When they were looking at doing a lot of in the corporate environment, they were looking at how do we build a bigger clientele across, especially globalization. And it's now migrated over into other environments, even some of the self-help, some of the other areas. But you can find it online. There's a lot of very good information. And the irony is, many of us have been doing something similar to that for a long time. Don't you think? But I think there's some real understanding to that now. Excellent question. Thank you.
We have does this work? Yes. Someone was asking if you have comments on the 38-minute missile alert in January. And that also segues into another question that we received, was suggestions about reaching people prior to or in the midst of an emergency.
Right. Well, reaching people prior to is absolutely critical. And for the missile alert, I am definitely going to defer to AP, because we talked about that yesterday. So, and there's some individuals in the room that might be, who were here, who I think would be able to handle that question a lot better. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. And by the way, I was alerted on that missile alert even in California. So, because I'm still so connected with the social media community in Hawaii. And I literally had one of the fire chiefs from another city whose son was going to school here writing me, asking me about it. So I was in there too.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you. That was an awesome presentation. Because now is it on?
Yes, now
Okay.
it's on.
What I did relay to a friend is, it's all well and good if we're doing great disaster communication in English and not reaching 80% of our population. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
My question is, now I'm involved here with Red Cross, with health communication, Red Cross, ham radio, et cetera. Where are we at in our disaster preparedness on the multicultural scale? I can't quite seem to get my finger on that answer.
Well, I think Red Cross has been, I'm an ex-Red Cross employee actually from way back when, and have worked with Red Cross extensively over the years. And I think we've all learned through trial and error, through success and failure. I think it's okay to say that. We've all learned. I think because of the complexity of situations right now, political situations, all kinds of situations, that organizations are knowing that they need to really reach out. I was actually in correspondence with someone from FEMA Region 9 the other day, and they had a workshop with the tribal nations I think it was just last week, and I know that they were really leaning forward into finding ways to build stronger relationships, because we know, I've been doing this for a very long time, even though I'm only 21. No, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing it for a long time, since 1990, and I will say that I feel like this is what makes or breaks it. And I've written a lot about this in articles, and there's some articles I've written about this, and if anybody wants me to share those articles with you, give me your email address on one of my business cards, which is out there, and I'll be happy to share it with you. But this has been out there, at the global level, they have known that this is one of the break points. This is hugely a break point. Why? Because of the issues of the increased weather events, this criticality on the culture and on the messaging and on getting these communities engaged is top priority. It's top priority, and I know that organizations are struggling with it, but I'm just telling you, there are resources out there. There are ways to do. There are ways to do it. So that's a great question, and I know the Red Cross has been one of the early leaders at figuring out and working to get out there. And there's probably people from the Red Cross here that maybe afterwards we could share. We're bringing you a mic. Thank you for that question. No, because it's hugely important, and even on social media. I mean, social media is very tricky. I'm actually an adjunct instructor here for the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center for University of Hawaii. And these issues of how do we go across these cultures. Yeah, these are game changers. This is not minor. This is major. And the challenge is, just in the circumstances on the mainland with the fires, there's some very big issues, and people are trying to address it. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm so excited that you guys had this as your information sharing. Yes.
Hi, Susie Chen, Oakland. I just wanted to suggest, recently, over the past maybe 2 years, I've tried to learn about the different apps for people that are hard of hearing or deaf, people that are visually impaired, people of different languages. So there are apps that already do translation. So I'm just wondering, to me, that would be something simple that American Red Cross or other kind of Department of Health, I wish Danny was here, could develop. I don't know the 7,100 languages in the and two languages in the world.
Yeah.
But I think for the various natural and man-made disasters, there can be very succinct instructions depending on what they are in the languages. So is there something more at the global level, or maybe in Hawaii, I should be looking at our local guys here, that could actually work with state civil defense or the city and county or county civil defense that could, help prior to the emergency? Because once that missile thing happened, I think for those that had like Verizon, we were able to get that notice. But for, what is the other one? There's another major, Sprint. All my friends that had that particular one did not get any messaging. So I think there has to be coordination with not only the people that can create the apps, but also those that are cell phone companies. And then once cell phones are not available, the ham radios and all of those that may still be useful to coordinate at that level. But I don't know of anything either globally within our United States or within our state that has done that.
Does anybody want to answer that for Hawaii? Okay, great. So they're going to, do you want to do that now? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. We're out of time for the questions. Thank you.